Start the recording and we'll get underway. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Frederick Winsness, and I am with the NetHope and the NetHope Solutions Center. I want to welcome everybody to another webinar in our series, particularly with the ICT4D conference. Madeline, could you go to the next slide, please? We are thrilled to have Catholic Relief Services, Safe Water Network, and SweetSense with us today. To talk about ICT for WASH, achieving global water security with digital innovations. And we have an excellent set of panelists, and we will get them introduced in just a moment. Before we do that, I want to go over a little bit of housekeeping. We want to keep this as interactive as possible, so please open the Zoom webinar chat window. You do that by clicking the chat icon on the bottom of your screen, and post your questions there, and we will have a period of 15 minutes or so towards the end of the hour today to do a Q&A session. And also, we are recording the session today, so please look for a follow-up email to you and everybody that registered for this webinar with a link to the posting, the recording, and the slides that will be posted on the NetHope Solutions Center. And at the very end of the session today, when you leave the Zoom meeting, you will be presented with an online survey. Please take a couple minutes to answer those questions to help us improve this webinar series going forward. And with that, if you can switch to the other slide deck, Madeline. I want to introduce Sonia Rutsos. She is with Catholic Relief Services and the manager of the ICT4D partnership and conference there. Over to you, Sonia.
Thank you very much, Frederick, and thank you very much, NetHope, for hosting us again with this webinar. So yeah, as Frederick said, we're looking at how digital technologies can improve global access to clean and safe drinking water, especially looking at monitoring of water supplies in urban and rural areas, and how mobile money programs can support access to household water. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker panel. We have Ian Moyes, he's the Global Water and Security Lead at Catholic Relief Services. Stywers Katuni, the Regional Director of SweetSense, and Jillian Winkler, the Senior Business Development Manager at Safe Water Network. I will also share some links to those organizations in case you're unfamiliar with those. And like already like to introduce you to our first speaker. Each of the speakers will receive a question and answer this question. In the meantime, feel free to post any questions you have, either for a particular speaker or in general about ICT for WASH or water security. And then we are looking forward to have an interactive discussion with everyone. So our first question is for Ian, and it's about we'd like to ask you to provide an overview of the importance and use cases of ICT for water security. Could you please share how CRS is using ICT in initiatives supporting water security, especially including WASH, so water sanitation, hygiene, and water resources?
Sure. Can you hear me? I'm not sure if I'm muted or not.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sonia, and thanks for organizing the webinar and giving us the opportunity to talk about water security and ICT4D. Excuse me. First, I just want to give a really broad overview for water security and a little bit why we selected water security for next year's one of the tracks of the ICT4D conference. As many people on the call will know, in 2018, the United Nations estimated that roughly 3.6 billion people live in areas vulnerable to water scarcity, the places where we don't have enough water for a variety of reasons, and that by 2050, that number could reach as much as 5.7 billion, so over half of the world's population could suffer from water shortage. And there's lots of reasons. Climate change is one of them, over-extraction of water from aquifers, and the inability to access water that exists, and then contamination of surface and groundwater. These all threaten the ecosystems and freshwater availability for us. So when we talk about WASH and the ways that we can improve access, especially the poorest and most vulnerable populations, we're really we're twofold. We're looking at the kind of natural systems pieces that will limit the amount of water that's available to people, and then as well as the human parts, which is how do we communicate, how do we talk about, how do we get data and information flowing so that we can improve services. Also, just a really quick background on CRS for those who don't know us. We're a roughly $1 billion organization. We're in over 115 countries. We have water programming in probably 30 or so countries, and we do both humanitarian and development work in scope. So a vast array of activities that we have, and certainly plenty of need for improved communication and information technology. To answer the question, we have our new agency water strategy, which goes through 2030 and focuses on this broad vision, water security for all. And within that, we have 3 priority areas. So we have WASH, which is what most people know when we think about water, and that's the kind of stuff for health. So access to drinking water, sanitation, hygiene. We also have water and sustainable landscapes, and this focuses on water, mostly water for agriculture, but really looking up and down a watershed and where water is available or scarce, and how the natural systems can be improved and to increase the availability of water. And then the third focus area for our strategy is water financing and governance. And so this is really how do we address the huge financial gap in terms of achieving UN Sustainable Development Goal number 6, which promises to provide water and sanitation for all, and how do we address the gap in financing to find that. So when I look at ICT, I look at those 3 priority areas for CRS. And I think more broadly, as I kind of alluded to earlier, the primary role for technology for us is really to enable the poor and vulnerable to benefit from services that they might not otherwise have access to. So people that have wealth or that live in urban settings they have piped water, they have access to services that folks who don't live in those environments may not. So in terms of WASH, providing better water, better sanitation, I think technology that provides real-time information, especially from remote areas, to those with the power to improve WASH is really important. And that may be remote rural, but that also may be remote urban. So the fringes of urban settlements that aren't connected to the water systems. Also, another example would be chlorine, the availability of chlorine and other supplies that help improve WASH and water quality, and the ability to know, or the ability to know when it's lacking or where it may be required is another piece that we look at. I'm not giving an expansive answer here, but giving you some samples for each of our 3 priority areas. So in water for agriculture, we're looking more at things like soil moisture. So how much soil is in the ground, or how much water is in the soil, which improves agriculture production, improves nutrient flow within the soils. And some of that comes from stream flows. So we look at how to measure stream flows, but some of it also comes from vegetative cover. So how do we use, for example, satellite monitoring to look at vegetative cover that increases soil moisture? The third priority area for us is financing. So we look at payment systems and then efficiencies that make finance systems more available to water service providers. So something like metering systems that really look at how much water is being consumed and allows for adequate cost recovery of it. Leak detection within systems where you're losing water but not able to capture revenue from it. So those are just a couple of examples from our 3 priority areas of how CRS is using ICT and what we're going to be looking for as we move forward. I think with that, I'll turn it back over to Sonia. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ian. That was a good overview. And now we like to ask Divers Katuni to give us a specific case study about the use cases and challenges of applying sensor technology for near-time monitoring of water supply. So Divers, could you share with us particularly what are the key success factors in rolling out your cellular and satellite connected sensors for wells or boreholes? And then also if you could briefly share some of the challenges you came across.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia, and thank you to the team for organizing this. I work for SweetSense, which is a company that is dealing with technology to monitor water systems. I'll give a small background to this and how SweetSense came into place. We obviously know, if you're in the water sector, that we are used to having infrastructure put in place. After the infrastructure is put in place, we at times leave it to the community or the governments to monitor this and make sure that the systems will never fail, and the system provides water, to eternity, which we obviously know has not been the case. We have seen scenarios where, over half of the systems that have been put in place in a certain place, for example, in a certain geographical location, would be not functional or would be broken at each point. There are studies showing that half of the systems installed by most of the donors fail after 1 year. And most of this, if you go and do some assessments, you find that most of them are not functional, 1 year down the line. A case in point is what we saw in the East Africa region, where SweetSense has been working. We have seen systems that were down, especially during the 2011 drought period, where we lost close to 250,000 people and impacted over 10 million people. The severe droughts. And part of the response to this was people coming, governments and donors responding by drilling more boreholes, punching boreholes everywhere, wells, thinking that that was a solution. But looking at, back at this, you find that most of the systems that were actually existing would have been just be fixed by just simple repairs. And that would have happened if, there was a monitoring system in place. So the background to SweetSense and what we do is that SweetSense has been manufacturing sensors, actually developing the technology that helps to monitor water points. Key of in our work is to monitor boreholes, which we've seen boreholes, you can call them wells. These are mechanically drilled holes on the ground that go to up to 100 meters, 200 meters, could be as shallow as 20 meters, and you have a pump installed down there to pump water out. What we have seen in our experience is that in the region we're working in, and currently, just to mention, we are monitoring water supplies in Ethiopia and Kenya for around 2 million people. So what we've been seeing is that we have the boreholes functioning, but there's no mechanism of saying when the borehole will goes down or when it's broken down. The communities might know, but possibly the community doesn't have the resource or the expertise to really make that repair, and possibly has to call to the government or call a donor or call another entity or a private sector partner to come in to come and support them. So that calling and that movement and that sharing of information, we realize takes time, which ends up having the borehole not functioning for quite some time. We've seen scenarios of 200 days in a year whereby the water point has been down because cumulative to 200 days, which means the person who's at times is supposed to know and come and help with the repairs is not aware, and possibly there's no phone network to call the person to tell him that somebody has to travel and look for the attendant or the technician to come and do that repair. So what SweetSense has been doing is installing water monitoring sensors. Currently, we have approximately 400 in the East Africa region that are monitoring water points. So by monitoring, I mean we are monitoring three things. One is the functionality of the borehole. Is it functional? Is it on? Is it off? Secondly, we are monitoring the pumping hours. How long has the borehole been pumping? And thirdly, we are monitoring the amount of water. This is possible through a calculation that is on our system that can tell us how much water is being produced at a certain water point in a day. So to the question about the key successes in our example, in what I've just talked about, key success factors that we've seen being very important is to just be clear that you're addressing a really felt need. We've seen, we have the data, the research data telling us this is a felt need, but also going back to the government entities and the communities and trying to make sure and making sure that this is a felt need to them, that having a sense on that system will help them to ease their monitoring of the, ease and increase functionality of those water points. So, but the first key success factors factor to us has been making sure that everyone, the government entity and the community feel this is a felt need and are aware that this is a solution that will help them to keep the boreholes functioning longer and less downtime, or less downtime on the pumps. The second success factor I would point out is because we are working on cellular and satellite networks, you need to be sure or to know how what if you have cellular connection in those locations. So one of the key success factors to us is that SweetSense provides both solutions. We have a cellular sensor and we have a satellite sensor. In areas where we get that we cannot, we get poor cellular connection, that's mobile phone connection, we have a solution of having a satellite sensor. So it's good to just be sure that you don't install a cellular sensor or a SIM-based sensor in an area where you have very unpredictable phone connectivity that will impede on the ease of transmitting data. The other point is to have a very clear rollout plan. This is one key success factor. Our current projects have been anchored on some ongoing projects with some of the partners who I know some of them on this call. We are partnering, for example, with CRS, we are partnering with World Vision and others through projects in the East Africa region and through that, we are having a very clear rollout plan. We have strategized on how to have for example, a 5-year plan on the development, on the installation, and who to involve, all a very well laid out plan. So this, we feel, has been a very key success factor to us because we have done things systematically, having everyone involved. Secondly, having to know when we are doing piloting, when are we scaling up, when are we doing replication, which I think has been one really good success factor. My last point is on the sustainability plan. We have, I think, for this, is one of the biggest success factors to cellular and satellite connected sensors, just being clear that you have a sustainability plan. For example, if a sensor was to go down or there are issues that are supposed to be addressed on the sensor is not working, how do we make sure that that is working? So at SweetSense, we have, for example, I am based in the region in Nairobi, whereby I try to support the team in making sure that the sensors are up and running, but also trying to have more of the government and more of the private sector partners involved in this, also getting involved such that we have a clear plan. If SweetSense doesn't have to have 10, 20 employees around here, but with a very minimal team, we can get the work done. I think just to mention a few challenges that we faced is that we have seen challenges on whereby if the community has very high expectations, for example, you go to a community, you have this sensor being installed, they know that somebody will now know that the system is working, possibly a government entity knows that, or their technician who is supposed to repair the boreholes knows about it. And that high expectation tends to be, if not well managed, can really be a challenge, because you find communities that expect a lot from some of these entities, for example, the government, and possibly the government has more, doesn't have that big allocation. But we're trying to address some of these challenges by making sure we have this challenge, particularly by making sure that the government entity and the community are talking, and the government or whoever is supposed to be fixing, for example, a local technician, a private sector partner who has been contracted by the community, is aware of what the community expects from him. The second challenge we've witnessed is we have seen challenges in government bureaucracies. When you come up with satellite technology, for example, you are supposed to get some of these requisite or authorization from some key government agencies, which at times take long. We all know the government bureaucracies that could, stall some of the very good ideas that we have. So we have tried to work very closely with the government, trying to anticipate some of these delays in approvals, but so far we have managed to get most of our approvals, I would say, in time, but some actually delayed. My last challenge, I think, we've seen challenges to do with I would call them natural calamities. If, for example, if there's a flooding in a certain area, your sensor is up there and it's supposed to be reporting. If that's, for example, a flooding scenario that we saw recently, if it's washing away a borehole or a water point, then your equipment might end up being part of what is being washed away. So this is not something we don't have much control over, because our equipment is based in the same station, but it's a lesson learn point for us that we possibly need to site most of this equipment better. I think I'll turn it back to Sonia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stivers. And thank you also very much to our attendees for posting your questions. Please do keep them coming. But before we go into our Q&A round, we also like to hear from Jillian. Jillian will share some insights, practical insights on setting up and designing mobile phone prepayment programs. So particularly, I would like to ask you if you can please share examples for designing and implementing mobile money services to increase and improve access to safe and affordable water.
Great, thanks, Sonia. Hopefully everybody can hear me. And thanks for inviting me to participate in this webinar. It's a topic that we've been really increasing interest in over the last couple of years. As Sonia mentioned, I'm from Safe Water Network, which works on developing an active market for small water enterprises in India and Ghana, and in the future beyond. Our locally owned and managed small water enterprises used a market-based approach to treat and sell affordable water to communities of approximately 3,000 to 5,000 people living in large rural towns and peri-urban areas where hand pumps are overwhelmed by the size of the community and where there aren't existing urban utilities. So today I'll be talking about what Safe Water Network has learned from our digital finance and mobile money program in Ghana. Specifically, we looked at prepaid meters for household connections, wherein treated water from our small water enterprises piped directly to the household. Water ATMs, which are automatic water dispensing units that use a prepaid card to retrieve water. And tied with both of these, mobile money integration, as Sonia mentioned, so that consumers could pay for both the ATM water service and household water supplies using mobile money. Just as a quick overview of the project over the last year, we've developed a mobile money USSD payment app, which can be used on feature phones. Most of the community members do have feature phones. We didn't want to create a tool just that would only work on, operator tablets or smartphones, since that's not as practical for our communities. We retrofitted all of our approximately 800 to 900 household connections to prepaid mobile money enabled meters and began installing water ATMs across our portfolio. We decided to roll out these innovations for a number of reasons, but fundamentally the most of them tie to what we found to be the key driver of consumer purchase and use of safe water, which is convenience. Greater convenience boosts revenue and tie into the financial viability of these systems for long-term sustainability. They increase the use of safe water for more purposes in the household, and they have the added benefit of reducing non-revenue water, our revenue collection rates, and operating expenses related to staff and travel time. And all of these help sustain the systems and make sure that there are enough revenues to cover our operating costs. As Sonia mentioned, I'll be talking about some good practice for designing and implementing mobile money programs around safe water use. And I want to highlight a few different categories of good practice. The first is understanding the importance of trust and making sure that building and maintaining trust is a factor in your decision-making around the program. For us as a water provider, trust in the quality and reliability of our water service is paramount. Once we lose that, we have a day where, we have consistent reliability issues, we lose value to our consumers, and in many cases, they'll revert to either untreated water, potentially sachet water at a much higher price, and we don't want that to happen. Adding mobile money means now that consumers need to trust the water service and that you'll manage their digital payments well. Moving from cash to mobile money may seem more transparent because you're able to track things on the provider side better. But for many of our consumers, removing cash from the equation really caused some concern. There's no direct interaction with another person from your enterprise, like vendors. That touch point isn't there anymore. So users might be worried about where their money's going. The time between payment doing a mobile money payment, and the actual water retrieval might be a lot longer. So there's questions about what happens to the money. You don't want consumers to think of this as a wholly business cost-cutting efficiency decision. It's important to demonstrate to the community how these changes will and do impact the sustainability of the water system. We do this already as good practice, have regular meetings with the district assembly and community leadership, WASH management teams about the financials around our stations, around these enterprises, and showing how mobile money affects this is really important. Another good practice is designing for transparency, and that's something we've definitely learned over the course of program implementation, and not necessarily something that was as front of mind when we first started. Because trust is so important, you'll want to design your digital finance or mobile money enabled hardware and software to be as transparent as possible. Being able to immediately see account balances through things like text notifications is one way to address this. We found notifications are really key in achieving confidence in our system and confidence in mobile money and using mobile money for payments. In one example, when we started rolling out prepaid meters, our mobile money adoption was less than 10% before notifications. Once we started having a messaging notification system when prepaid accounts were topped up, they went above 80% of mobile money adoption. That happened in a 2-month time frame, so really impactful. We also found that when it came to water ATMs, where you're going to a tap, an automatic tap, they wanted an interface on the actual equipment so that they can walk away after getting water, immediately knowing how much water credit was left in the account. Just like many of us would like to see after taking money out of a cash ATM. I would want to confirm that there's been a change to my account because of the retrieval, but I want to make sure that the change matches my request and matches the amount of money or the amount of water that I'm getting. It's also key to note that technical issues with the notification messaging and a lack of balance visibility really can affect mobile money usage. Customers who have had a bad experience will go back to cash, and it'll be very, very hard to get them to try and trust and adopt mobile money again. So as I mentioned before, this is something that we've learned over the course of our implementation, but it really can't be an afterthought. It's worth taking the time to test how the messaging flows work and making sure that there's a process in place for this, and to get consumer feedback about not just the process, but also about the app that's being developed, how the information is shared in different messages, whether more information or less information is better, and how it's framed. Finally, another good practice that we found is around customer service, but it's very tied into training, because when we're rolling out programs like this in our communities, mobile money is really only used for remittances or person-to-person payment. So consumer education has been a long-term part of the mobile integration. You can start good customer service right from registration when you're signing people up for either water ATM or household meter accounts, walking them through the process of signing up for mobile money. And when there are problems, there need to be an easy way for consumers to complain and feel that they are heard, and that there's a way for it to be tracked. So clear communication channels. This is especially important with household connections. People do pay a last mile connection fee for this value added service. We don't want our pipe networks to sit dormant. This can affect water quality, and it doesn't fulfill the service commitment that we've made to our consumers. And so this is an area that we're definitely still working on. We've seen how problematic it is to lack a streamlined and clear user complaint system. So we're developing, we use WhatsApp messaging, but in the past it's been more of an ad hoc system. We know how our operations are working, but because we use a mobile monitoring system for that. But when it comes to consumer-based problems or questions, we're putting in a stronger recourse system for that. And as a last piece, we would also recommend that the water provider, supplier really consider whether it can take on the mobile money transaction fee to reduce the financial burden for users. We do this right now. It's part of our business model. And while it is an increased cost, we don't think we'd see the same mobile adoption rates without it. And in the end, it works out to our benefit. So I will leave it there. Thanks, Sonia.
Thank you very much, Jillian. Now we have some time for question and answers. And while I will address each question initially to one of the panel speakers, please do feel free to also add your thoughts and step in so we can have this as an interactive discussion. So my first question is for Ian. Ian, the question is, it sounds like WASH and water security takes partnerships like those with local community, other NGOs and partners, governments, etc. When you use ICT in this effort, how do you make sure that the data is securely shared across these partnerships?
Great, thanks for the very good question, Sonia. Good question, very relevant question. We see all these data breaches globally, so there's no reason to expect that type of outcome wouldn't happen in the spaces that we work in, the more development context. And unfortunately, there's probably not a single kind of great answer for that, but there's a number of them. First, we have to understand when we talk about WASH and water security, we're talking about a vast array of interventions and partners and so forth, and that it's, we're not always talking about one single thing. So we have to really define the parameters on what we're talking about and what the data is that we're addressing the security around. There is, of course, a variety of data protocols that ensure security, whether it's on the technological side of things or whether it's on the protocol side of things. And any good intervention is going to take into consideration those protocols. I think when a service is provided to users, really involving those users in the process of it's kind of front-end training on it, but it's also, and not just the people that will be implementing it, but the people that will be benefiting from it. So understanding the technology itself. Often technology is not some black box. It's it may appear that way, but you can really communicate it in cohesive and understandable ways to all types of stakeholders. So really involving users in the process so that they see what's going on and the value that comes out of that. I think often, for example, when we bring in governments and we talk about, well, data, you have all this data, we'd like to use it for X, Y, and Z. Governments see that as a private kind of almost competitive advantage they have over their people in some ways, which is what probably some of the concerns around data security are. But in fact, once they see the value that is there when data becomes public and when data becomes open source, there's a lot more leverage points to engage them in an ICT initiative. So I think transparency in what we're doing is really important, and really bringing in the stakeholders, especially government, getting buy-in from national and local leaders. And then on that very, very last point, leaders, I think investing in leadership is really critical. Investing in training of leaders, investing in what leadership actually means. I'm always reminded of the example of leadership. I think it's in Cambodia, Watershed Asia. They, on a whim, they sell latrine products, and on a whim, they decided to do training of local leaders, and they decided to give them leadership training. It wasn't in their plan or their business model, but they decided to do it, and they saw a 4-fold increase in sales. So really what you see in that is the power of information and the power of understanding that leadership isn't about some private kind of coercive type activity of doing things and strangleholding things. It's actually about enabling people to succeed. So investing in leadership, I think, is really important when we talk about data security.
Thank you very much, Ian. Actually, when we're talking about local leadership, we also had a question specifically for Stivers in that regard. Cyrus, what is the plan for handing over to the local community, and how do you build their capacity?
Yeah, so thank you for that. One thing to mention is that SweetSense is a company. It's actually a private company. We are in it for the business. And one of the things we're trying to do is demystify the partnerships between NGOs and private sector partners. We've been talking about a lot of private sector partnerships, but at times it's not actualized. So so SweetSense is a private sector partner on most of the projects that we are on, but also we do our individual sales, going out there to market our product and get the product out there on installed for communities. Could be based on demand by governments or regional governments or the national government. So how we involve the community and how we train them, one of the things we do is to make sure that we have, before an installation is done, we have talked to them. We have made sure that we have understood how their response to borehole repairs is done. But the other critical thing is that, remember, we are not there to leave the community. So we are a company, so we are not like an NGO that would pop in and pop out. We are a company that, our sensors are up there, and we're there to make sure that the sensor is functional. So one of the things we do is make sure that the community understands what kind of data is being collected. We go through what components of the sensors are installed on their borehole, what they're doing, and explain to them what we are monitoring. So, for example, we have a current clamp that we put on the cables or one of the power lines that goes to the pump. That is where we monitor a lot of the functionality of the borehole. So we have a clamp that is getting us information on how the pump is utilizing power. So we would be monitoring the power demanded by that pump and knowing if there's power flowing, and cumulatively in a day, for example, in 24 hours, we can say the pump was up for this duration of time. So to the community, we would have explained that this is what the clamp is doing, this is what the other sensor that is getting the information from the clamp is doing, how the transmission is happening. But obviously some of this might get very technical for the community. So for the basics, we try to be to simplify information for the community use as much as possible. Again, as I said, we are there to stay with the community. What we do is try to make sure we have a product that is robust enough. We've been installing sensors in Rwanda for over, I think now this is our 6th or 7th year with part of the Rwanda project, and we have the sensors up and running there. We have the ones in Kenya installed for the duration of 4 or 5 years now. The ones in Ethiopia, we recently started our work in Sierra Leone, and also we are moving to Nigeria with some we are starting off a project in Nigeria. So you can see it's not a one-off thing. It's a business. It's a business model we have. We have worked out our models, and we see that through that involvement of the community, them seeing the added benefit of that, and linking that information through a dashboard, which is actually for the public sites, with public data. Someone can just log in and see which pump is functioning. Could be for various reasons, for a technician who is supposed to repair the pump, for the community who is supposed to know, who want to know how the borehole has functioned for the last 3 or 4 days, for a water committee who wants to just say, in the last 1 month, we can be accountable that we've actually delivered, 90% functionality, or for the technician sitting at the county or, at the local Department of Water office who responds to those breakages. This is data that they can easily share. For private data, we can work out an access level where you have to log in. But for most of these public sites where we've been working, the data has been shared out with the community, and they understand what it's supposed to be doing.
Thank you very much. You now have answered already a lot of my other questions I had for you, which is brilliant. So one of the questions was about who has access to the borehole data you're collecting, which thank you very much for sharing already. And another question was particularly about a project in Nigeria. So I guess now I just want to still stick a little bit with the use of data and open data. And I have a question for Jillian. How do you use this data to show impact to donors and sponsors in real time, for example, around water usage or beneficiaries, cost, etc.?
Sure. Well, so what's great about what we've done over the last year as well is we have a mobile monitoring system that we use to track our operational and financial performance at the enterprise level. But as there are definitely challenges in integrating new kind of data management platforms. So each are the hardware that we use for the water ATMs, the prepaid meters, as well as, you know, the mobile money and network operator information. These are all disparate systems. So what we've been able to do is develop a management platform that brings in all this information together, and then it's all packaged in one place and can be analyzed and kind of sit on top of each other. We do have a lot more work to do around that, but we're able to show donors and other investors and other people in the sector what the impacts are of different campaigns, different promotions, different pricing levels when we make tweaks to our model or when we do some kind of marketing activity. We can show the impacts on mobile money usage, on ATM usage, on you know, the number of times purchases are made throughout the week and at what level. We get a much greater sense of consumer behavior around this, so that we know how better to serve. If we find that you know, more people are, during the rainy season, we, you know, have trouble with revenues because there are other there's more available alternative sources. So what kind of promotions or incentives can we put in place then to, because at the end of the day, what we want to do is generate enough revenue so that the system can then still be functional and successful and effective during the dry season. So we need to link this both to consumers' understanding of why it's important to purchase water, not just for their health, but if they want to have a system in place for the dry season, then, you know, we need to find the right balance of how much water they can be purchasing from us during the rainy season as well. And we're able to learn a lot about the consumers that way, and it's helpful for our donors to be able to track kind of these changes if they're looking to invest in water ATMs, to retrofit some of our stations. We want to be able to demonstrate that people are now using the water ATMs. It's an added cost, it's an added investment. So what is the benefit for both consumers and for both? Are they using it at different times of day and not having to wait online when others, you know, when the enterprise lines are busy? Can they go at off times? And ATMs allow them to do that. So it spreads out the convenience for consumers, and shows donors that there are both consumer impacts felt directly at like the household level, as well as sustainability impacts.
Thank you. One question, I think it might be a quick question, was also that if the mobile payment for safe water was only provided to individual households, or if it can also be used for community access points.
It can be used for community access points, yes. So the water ATMs are all located at standpipes around the community, both at the main treatment facility, you know, the main kiosk, as well as remote standpipes around the community. So right now, since there's less direct touch point training, you know, there's less direct touch points between our enterprises and consumers when it's not a household connection. When it's a household connection, there's a meter installation, there's more direct interaction between operators and field service technicians and the household. With ATMs, it's a bit more challenging because group trainings are harder. Because you have a whole group, you can't kind of walk through each individual community member. It's not really as efficient. So we've seen more challenges in mobile money adoption for community access for these water ATMs. So one way we're addressing this, we're empowering the operators to be able to purchase water for people using their own, you know, the enterprise's mobile money network account, mobile money account. So it's an alternative, and it's not something we want to, you know, continue for the long term. Ideally, we want each user, each consumer to be doing it separately, but to have operators available to make the purchases. We don't want to make it so difficult that they won't buy water at all. Doing that, and also incentivizing consumers through promotions, through water credits, through things like, you know, even a t-shirt for using mobile money to purchase water, even at community standpoints. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I have a question for Ian. Since CRS is working with both SweetSense and Safe Water Networks, one of the questions is how do you select the right ICT solution and also your partner? How do you make that decision? Do you have any practical advice or guidelines for our audience?
Sure. I mean, in the world of partnering, there's no cookie cutter answer, but certainly, we scan the landscape in a given locality of where we're working and look at our needs. The preference is most often to look locally. So if there's, for example, this is not an ICT example, but if there's a locally produced water filter of high quality, we'll definitely prefer that over an international product. But in the ICT space, that's very rare that you'll find that. We do exchange quite a bit on the conference circuit. So one of the benefits of attending conferences, and we build partnerships over time. So you understand technologies, you understand the needs, and you work with providers such as SweetSense and the work Safe Water Network is doing, and some of the vendors that they use for water ATMs to learn their business models and their products and see whether they're suitable or can be adaptive to your particular needs. So in an organization like CRS, we do all of the above and more. Again, no simple answer for where to find technologies, but they're out there and they're certainly applicable.
Thank you. And maybe, I guess, sort of on the other side, Stivers, do you have any guidance on how to work on a successful partnership?
Not really. I think Ian captured it very well. We, especially for SweetSense, as a business, obviously we'll be looking out for opportunities to expand or scale our technology and learn. We've been approached by different entities, for example, in the refugee camps, where ideas of how to manage refugee camps, water supplies. We do lots of rural water supplies. We've been also venturing the last few years on actually the last 1 year on urban water supplies, where we are working with an urban water supply company to monitor the sources of water, which are majorly 15 boreholes. So we've tried to instrument or put a sensor on each of those boreholes, and then that kind of data helps them to make decisions. Again, we've also been approached by, for example, the National Drought Management Authority in Kenya. They work on drought management and response and resilience mechanisms, and on that, what we're calling the Ending Drought Emergency Strategy, they've actually engaged us to provide data for them. We've actually had to build a new dashboard for them based on their needs. So you can imagine we get all this. There's no clear-cut answer to that, but we try to scan our map out our partners and try to look for opportunities where we could advance our product in terms of making it more robust, but also in terms of a business case for that.
Thank you. We also had a number of questions regarding connectivity, particularly around areas with poor or limited connectivity. So this is generally a question for everybody, but I want to just start with Stivers. Is your solution, is it possible to use in a community without power?
Yes, so I mentioned that we're working with cellular and satellite networks. Cellular, we have cellular and satellite sensors. The sensor is powered by a solar panel, a very small panel, 2 watts, very small panel, because we've inbuilt a lithium battery that, once it's charged for around an hour a day, you get, almost 2 or so days of charge on that sensor. So we run our sensors on a solar solar power. We try to, the areas we work in, most of them have this, solar power in plenty. The other thing to note is the other sensor that is not connected to the solar panel is powered by induction. It's self-powered by, as it taps power supply cable that it's monitoring, it also harvests the power and charges itself. So we've tried to look for innovative ways of not having to have, separate power supplies to the sensor or to any of the components that we have. So it's self-powered, and also it's powered by the power line that is the usual line going to the pump, but also we have solar panels on that.
Thank you. And Jillian, do you have any further comments or practical tips around working with either poor communities without power, or maybe alternative, I guess, in a similar situation in emergency situations with limited connectivity?
Well, so we don't right now. Most of our communities do have do have some reliability on the grid, but our stations, I'd say the majority of our water enterprises do use solar for the water pumping, and the ATMs that we use are also solar powered. So there are opportunities. We do often use the grid as backup. In terms of emergency settings, we haven't explored that yet. A part of and it's not because of the hardware challenges necessarily, it's because of our business model. Our small water enterprises need kind of a consumer base that we can rely on, and often in emergency settings, you don't necessarily have that. We work in relatively stable environments. We have been exploring potential partnerships to introduce to work with others kind of more equipped for emergency or humanitarian settings, to train them on using water ATMs and taking our learnings on water ATMs and digital finance to these areas. We do think that there's a real opportunity to put water ATMs in community locations and be able to provide credits to certain beneficiaries, to certain consumers, to help them with their water purchases. Because the water is prepaid and because water credit is stored on kind of a card or a fob, a little tag, the money flows can be much more closely tracked. So in terms of a cash subsidy program or for water credit, how can water be another service that's provided with a stipend?
Excellent, thank you. Also, Ian, obviously you mentioned earlier briefly how CRS is using ICT for WASH in emergency settings. We also have a bit more specific question to when you mentioned earlier financing of water service and a pipeline construction for community. And I think the question was just if you could elaborate a little bit more about this initiative you mentioned.
Sure, and I also noticed there was a question about tools used for scalable watershed restoration in degraded land, so I can say a word about that. First, relating to the finance of water services. One of the big problems with financing water service providers is the bankability of the water service provider itself. So one of the first things that we do is we make sure that water meters are installed everywhere. So water meters allow you to measure how much water is actually going into a household, allows you to improve your accountability systems and the payment systems. So makes your overall system run more efficiency and is driven towards making the water service provider more bankable so they can access financing, whether it be a strictly commercial finance vehicle, whether it be a blended finance solution or other. The digital, kind of more digital finance stuff, certainly connecting, similar to what we do in the United States with, say, your house payment or your auto payment. So connecting these water service provider bank accounts with the loan that they take out ultimately. So allowing for that ease of transfer of financial payments. And then in terms of mobile money, some of the stuff that Jillian was talking about, trying to facilitate the ability of communities and consumers to make payments. So it's really much more around the financing piece of it than really around the pipeline construction for communities. I'm not sure if there was a specific question around the pipelines, but certainly you're more than welcome to email me or put it in the chat window for a more detailed response to that. To jump to the other question I saw in the chat window around scalable watershed restoration or degraded land. So I just want to mention a couple. The World Resources Institute has the Aqueduct project, really based on satellite imagery and looking at vegetative cover, which is really important for restoring land. First, the ability to see where there is or is not vegetative cover, and improving the land's ability to absorb water and increase infiltration of water into the soil. So look at the WRI Aqueduct project. Drought awareness technologies, so stuff that looks at meteorology and can kind of do some prediction around when droughts will be coming, is helpful. And then there's a variety of tools around the soil moisture the moisture in the soil itself. CRS developed one called the Water Benefits Calculator. You can find that at waterbenefitscalculator.com. And there it's an interactive tool, and this is really for on-farm scale. So it's an interactive tool designed to model and quantify the benefits of applying what we call water smart agriculture practices on farms, which improves the water in the watershed, the water flow through the soil and so forth. We are looking to expand the water benefits calculator, which was designed under our Blue Harvest project, and looking across a watershed to see how we can calculate how much water is being replenished versus how much water is being taken out. And that really ultimately would apply to the drinking water situation in terms of water availability or subsurface water availability. So again, waterbenefitscalculator.com to see what CRS has done in that space. And please send me an email if you have follow-on questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ian. I also like to note that we will send out a email after this webinar and share the speaker emails as far as we have permission to do so, and also happy to facilitate further introductions. And we will also provide a summary afterwards with the sort of key discussion topics here. And I know we might not be able to come to all of the questions here because we're nearly at the end of our webinar. But if you do have any other additional questions, feel free to post them in the chat room now or send them to us. And I'd just like to ask Stivers, do you have any sort of last comments from us, for our audience rather, any particular, maybe any future trends you see or anything you're excited about sort of coming up with SweetSense?
Yeah, so thank you. Really, one of the things I'm really excited about is we are seeing more of the traditional NGOs and governments trying to adopt a business unusual. I would actually call it a business unusual model, and this is the way to go. The future trends are trying to harvest all the technology or the available solutions out there, and many of them exist. So I think it's a call for all of us to think outside the box, think business unusual, not just drilling a borehole, not just putting a water system there and thinking that by just training the community or just showing them who is the local plumber or where they can get a pump, that is actually a sustainability mechanism. Actually, we've seen such mechanisms have been failing, where a community was told, this is where you get your pump or where you get your spare parts. These mechanisms are slowly failing. So it's this need for us to adopt technology, think through the technology angle, whereby you can get this data. It's historical data you can check. You have, you can make decisions for planning, for budgeting, for a small community water management committee that can really have a history of how the borehole has been functioning. What have they been fixing? When does it break down? Is it every other dry period? All this is information that they can really harvest and have on their phones. One of the other things I'm excited about is that at SweetSense, we're trying to also think outside, think how best to provide our data. We've been told of stories of people don't have laptops, can't access the internet. How best do we do that? So we're trying to simplify, for example, the model I mentioned. We are trying to, ending drought emergencies. trying to have our emails, reports being sent out on emails to key officials or key community members who are supposed to be acting upon those reports. Could be a weekly email, we can tailor that to be a daily email that tells them how the system is functioning. But also we've seen a lot of use of, social media platforms like WhatsApp, where it's a big opportunity for us to also send reports through that, take a screenshot of a dashboard, send that through, that can be accessed through just on your mobile phone, most of which we are seeing most of the people we're working with having access to such. I think we're also excited about what you're doing with other projects like NASA. We have recently partnered with NASA on a project where we want to we want to improve on how drought monitoring is done. So providing real-time data from the sensors on the ground, having information on how groundwater abstraction is being done, and also overlaying that with what we see with the vegetation cover, how the satellites are showing image. You can see a place is drying up, but you don't know what is going on down underground water. So through the partnership with NASA, we're trying to build on that, provide real-time data on how abstraction of groundwater sources is being done. But also moving forward, we are trying to look for opportunities where we can have our data being used for various other sources, for example, nutrition, health, and also groundwater monitoring, whereby we can provide that information to water management, or what Ian is referring to as some of these regions where you have scarcity in terms of resource being abstracted in a very big way, providing data to show that, please, if you continue like that, possibly it's not sustainable. So I think the future is bright for us at SweetSense, and all these opportunities are really making us very excited, and we hope to partner with more and more of, especially the people on this call today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you also very much to Jillian and to Ian for joining us and for the contribution. This is the end of our webinar. I'd just like to mention that we also have a water security track at the 12th ICT4D conference, which will take place at April 21st to 23rd in Abuja, Nigeria. And we're currently looking for speakers, so please do apply to speak at the conference, either on water security or any of the other tracks. We're looking forward to welcoming you in Abuja and also at the following webinars. So thank you everyone, and have a wonderful morning or afternoon. And thank you to NetHope for hosting us again.
Thank you, Sonia. Just to add very quickly, we may want to look at all the questions that we did not get to, and maybe we'll post a Q&A question or answers on the website when we get to that. Thank you very much, Sonia, for producing this series, and thank you to the speakers and for all of the attendees for excellent interaction. Have a great day, the rest of your day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.